You don't realize how often you're living inside a distortion, not a dramatic one, just the subtle kind that pulls you a few degrees off reality. A small misorientation, repeated enough times, can end up running your life for you. It decides what you notice, what you avoid, what you choose, and what you walk away from, all while you're convinced you're being yourself. It all starts with one simple shift. You stop perceiving what's real, and that's the moment clarity disappears. You think you're looking at reality. You're not. You're looking at a projection, a memory, a fear that learned to speak before you did. And the moment you stop perceiving what's actually happening and turn your attention toward your internal version of it, your mind spins, your energy scatters, and simple decisions become complex and confusing. Not knowing how to orient yourself toward what's real doesn't just make life harder. It makes your life not yours. Most people talk about clarity as if it's a feeling or a lifestyle perk. A quiet morning, a calm mind, a day without interruptions, something that happens once the chaos settles. But clarity is none of those things. Clarity is your internal system accurately oriented to what's real right now. That's it. When your orientation is correct, your intelligence comes back online. Your energy stops bleeding into projections. Your decisions become obvious. You don't have to hype yourself up or soothe yourself down. You simply see things as they are. And from there, you can feel and act accordingly. And this is why clarity is the first form of power, because you can't author your life from inside a hallucination. Every act of authentic personal agency comes from correct orientation, and clarity is simply the proof that you're pointed in the right direction. This is Amara Strand. Welcome to the podcast. Today, we're talking about clarity, not as insight, not as calm, but as the functional state that makes personal authority possible. Most people think confusion comes from intensity, from overwhelm, from having too much on their plate or insufficient information. Confusion is a perceptual malfunction. Here's the actual mechanism. Your attention fragments. It splits between what's in front of you and the noise inside your head. You stop accurately tracking the moment itself, and you start responding to the internal replica of this moment, built from memory, anticipation, and the personas you've rehearsed for years. And those personas, the synthetic versions of yourself, they feel real. They're familiar. They have texture, weight, predictable rhythms, and a portfolio of convincing emotions. But familiarity isn't truth. It's just something you've rehearsed so many times. It feels authentic. When you're misoriented, you can't tell that you're misoriented. It shows up as unnecessary pressure inside moments that should be straightforward. You overanalyze things that don't benefit from more analysis. You pick apart tiny details because you can't see the shape of the whole. You feel pushed and pulled to meet the needs and desires of whichever persona is activated. This isn't overthinking in the way people use that word. It's your perception pointed away from the actual moment. Instead of registering what's happening, you're tracking imagined futures, old emotional echoes, feared judgments, and predictions your synthetic mind is generating because it's uncomfortable with direct contact with reality. The cost is sovereignty. The moment you are misoriented, you're no longer directing your life. You're being directed by an internal program. And you blame yourself for it instead of recognizing the simple truth. Your compass was pointed at the wrong thing. So what is clarity? Clarity is the experience of not being divided inside yourself. You're aware of what's happening. You can feel your actual position without suppressing it, justifying it, or performing it. There's no internal argument, no need to manage yourself. You're not predicting, rehearsing, or adjusting for imagined reactions. You're present enough to distinguish what's yours from what isn't, and that makes the next step apparent. Not necessarily easy, but obvious. And this is the power of orientation. When your awareness points towards what's real, both externally and internally, clarity appears. Not because you created it, but because that's what perception produces when it's in contact with reality. Here's the mechanism. The natural system perceives and knows. The synthetic mind interprets and reconstructs mental models of reality. It collects fragments, memory, fear, relational conditioning, internalized authority, and it assembles them into a familiar inner world, inhabited by a cast of personas. This world is consistent, patterned, and self-reinforcing. It's also not real. When clarity vanishes, it's because your orientation shifted from a reality to this synthetic construction, and your energy gets fed into dealing with the mental models, not with reality. You get absorbed into this inner world, reacting to interpretations, not reality. And you're acting through personas, not your authentic position. The synthetic mind produces meaning and stories faster than you can perceive reality. And because it feels like you accept its constructions as real. This is why misorientation is so difficult to detect, because it doesn't feel like distortion. It feels like thinking. And this is where power enters the picture. Power isn't force. It's not self-assurance. It isn't the capacity to impose your will. Power is the ability to respond to reality from your real position. And you cannot do that without clarity. Everything downstream, your boundaries, your decisions, your self-trust, depends on whether you're oriented correctly. You can make impressive moves while you're misoriented, but they won't originate from you. They'll come from the synthetic constructions you've learned to inhabit. They may function, but they won't liberate. Clarity restores you to yourself. Orientation restores you to reality. And together they form the ground on which personal sovereignty stands. This is why clarity is your first form of power, not because it feels good and not because it confers confidence, but because nothing in your life can be true, stable, or self-authored without it. When you're actually perceiving what's happening, situations and choices that felt difficult become workable. Your actions align on their own. Your natural intelligence comes online, and your energy stops bleeding into noise, and agency appears not as something you construct, but as something that was always there, waiting for the distortion to clear. When your perception is aligned with reality and with your true self, a few immediate changes happen, and they happen without effort and without techniques. First of all, decision-making simplifies. You're finally in contact with your real position. Even in complex situations, your true position reveals a far shorter list of what actually matters to you. And the choice that serves your real priority becomes obvious, and it isn't immediately drowned out by the personas that rush in with their own agendas, their own fears, and their own criteria for what your life should be. Your choices stop serving the needs of the versions of you that don't belong in the moment to begin with. When perception is clear, only the real paths remain. Another thing that shifts is that boundaries become factual instead of moral. How many times do you find yourself negotiating your boundaries not with others, but with yourself? So often, you're unsure if you have the right to draw a firm line and hold it. When you're oriented toward what's real, you no longer argue against your boundaries or try to convince yourself you're overreacting. You ask a simpler question. Given what's actually happening here, what is my authentic position? Next, your energy stops draining into non-events You stop manufacturing complexity. You stop bracing for reactions that belong to earlier chapters of your life. You stop building internal cases for things that don't need a defense. When perception is accurate, you don't need to justify reality to yourself. And lastly, you stop pouring your energy into other people's internal worlds. When you're oriented toward reality, you can tell what's yours and what isn't. You can let people feel whatever they feel without absorbing it, fixing it, or reorganizing yourself around it. And none of this requires self-improvement. It requires accurate orientation. Because once perception is aligned with reality, most of what feels like work stops being work at all. When you're able to orient yourself to who you really are and track your external reality accurately, you have moments of clarity. We've all had these, and they are welcome indeed. But as you know, this kind of intermittent clarity, it isn't life-changing. When you're able to stabilize orientation, that's when everything changes. So if it's this simple, why do you lose it? I mean, you've had clear moments. You know what it feels like when everything clicks for a moment. You've had stretches where life feels obvious and uncomplicated, where your next step didn't require justification to your imaginary inner committee, where you acted from clarity, even when you were scared. And then it evaporates. Why? Why? If clarity is just accurate orientation, and you've proven that you can orient accurately sometimes, why do you lose it so quickly? This is the real question behind all this work. And you reach for familiar explanations, like, I have this trauma, I have these patterns, I have an anxious brain, it's my conditioning. But none of those explain the mechanism of misorientation. If you trace the source of the noise, you'll find a second internal system that competes with your natural ability to orient clearly. A system that converts simplicity into complication. A system that generates tension and unnecessary layers, preventing you from meeting the moment directly. You know this system. I call it the synthetic mind. It's the inner commentary that talks you out of what you know, the familiar pressure that insists you haven't thought enough, haven't considered enough, haven't protected yourself enough. It manufactures doubt. It manufactures feelings. Think back to a time when you had a clear knowing and then watched yourself dismantle it piece by piece. This is it. You've seen this system at work. It isn't designed to support clarity. Its primary agenda is to maintain control and to preserve its own framework, even at your expense. You can't root yourself in clarity because this internal system hijacks your orientation before you realize what's happening. And what's happening is this. You've stopped tracking reality and started tracking an internal replica, a reconstruction stitched from memory, anticipation, and old emotional reflexes. You turned away from your true position and got pulled in to one of those personas the synthetic mind uses to navigate your life. The false reality is louder, more dramatic, more emotionally charged, and far less accurate. So here's the shift. You don't need to force yourself into a better version of you. You don't need to construct discipline or cultivate certainty. None of that produces clarity. Orientation does. Point your awareness toward reality, externally and internally, and clarity follows. Point it anywhere else, and you're running your life from a substitute version of yourself. Clarity isn't an upgrade. It's the baseline for a life that is actually yours. And without it, you're living inside a distortion that feels like you, but isn't. Next time, we'll examine the mechanics of disorientation, the exact forces that pull you out of reality and into the synthetic world, and how to feel that shift as it happens. Until then, watch where your perception goes. Is it on what's happening or the story about what's happening? That gap is where your life has been disappearing. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. And if you want to understand what it means to live from your real position instead of the synthetic one, you'll find more at amarastrand.com. Thanks for spending this time with me today, and I'll talk to you again soon.